The record was not classified. That was the first thing Archivist Von Eel noticed when she pulled it from the deep stack. Not sealed, not redacted, not even flagged with a priority marker. Just sitting there in the open registry like an ordinary trade acknowledgement between a grain shipment and a navigational correction. 43 years in the Interstellar Compact's memory division, and she had never seen anything like it. A document that should not exist, formatted like a debt ledger, stamped with a Terran seal she didn't recognize, addressed to no one. The timestamp placed it 11 years before humanity had achieved faster-than-light travel. She read the first line twice. This favor is recorded. It will not be forgotten. Then she set it down very carefully, as though it might break, and sat in the dark of her archive for a long time. The planet was called Kethsora, which translated loosely as the place that endures, though most species in the compact had stopped using that name after the Merva-On occupation began. Now they called it what the Merva-On called it, Processing Zone 7. The translation was clinical. The reality was not. Von Eel had not been stationed there. Almost no one from the compact had. The Merva-On were not technically in violation of any treaty. The Kethsorans were a pre-contact species, unprotected, legally invisible, and the compact's founding charter had 17 distinct clauses that collectively meant someone else's problem. The humans had arrived on Kethsora in the 47th year of their spacefaring period, roughly 9 years before anyone in the compact had considered them worth watching closely. A single transport vessel, mid-range, no weapon signature that the Merva-On patrol drones would have flagged. They had come in low, riding the thermal shadow of the planet's second moon, which was either an extraordinary coincidence or evidence that someone on that ship knew exactly where the patrol drones were. The Merva-On monitoring station logged the arrival. They noted small craft, unknown configuration, 1 life sign cluster, 17 individuals. They assigned it a risk category of 0. They were wrong about almost every part of that assessment. But here is what makes the record strange. The humans hadn't come to fight. Von Eel had spent 3 weeks confirming this. They had come to trade. Basic agriculture equipment, water filtration units, 2 crates of medicinal compounds. They had landed in a valley the Merva-On didn't bother monitoring because nothing of value was there, just the original Kethsoran settlement that had survived the occupation by making itself appear worthless. 5,000 people living in deliberate obscurity, eating reduced rations, wearing faded colors, keeping their lights dim. The human crew had stayed for 6 days. Then they left. And 11 years later, when humanity stood before the Compact Council for their formal first contact accession hearing, the Merva-On delegation had voted against their admission with an intensity that struck everyone in the chamber as disproportionate, personal almost. That was the first mystery. The second was simpler and worse. Von Eel found it buried in a compact environmental survey conducted 8 years after the humans' Kethsora visit. The survey was routine, just atmospheric and population sampling, but someone had attached a notation in a non-standard data field in a cipher that took her 4 days to crack. It was a count, not of the current Kethsoran population, but of the difference between the current population and the population from the previous survey. The Kethsorans had been declining at a predictable rate under Merva-On occupation. Resource extraction, environmental degradation, controlled caloric reduction. Standard slow-pressure methodology. The Merva-On were patient. Until the survey year after the humans visited, when the decline stopped, when inexplicably it reversed. 5,000 people, slowly dying, had started surviving at a higher rate, then reproducing, then thriving. In 6 days, somehow, 17 humans had done something that fundamentally changed the survival trajectory of an entire civilization. The notation in the cipher field didn't explain what. It just said, "Ask the humans." The third mystery was the one that kept Von Eel awake. In the open registry, adjacent to that first document, The one stamped with the Terran seal, the one formatted like a debt ledger. There was a second document, shorter, just a list of names. 17 of them. Human names, she assumed, though she could only confirm 12. The other 5 were in a format she didn't recognize from any human naming convention she'd studied. At the bottom of the list, in the same handwriting as the first line, was a single notation. They know what they owe. Remind them if they forget. They won't forget. She had no idea who they referred to. The humans? The Kepserans? Someone else entirely? And then she turned the page and discovered there were 47 more documents in the same series, the same seal, the same format, different planets, different dates, spanning 31 years. All of them predating humanity's official presence in the wider galaxy, all of them containing the same opening line. This favor is recorded. It will not be forgotten. Commander Sura Vasquez had been on that first ship. Vanille found her through a records trace that had taken 6 days and 3 different archival systems because Vasquez had an unusual relationship with official documentation. Specifically, she appeared in very few records for someone who had apparently been quite busy for 3 decades. She was 71 years old when Von Eel finally located her, living on a mid-tier orbital station near the compact's outer boundary. Retired, nominally. Running what appeared to be a small shipping consultancy. The archivist had expected difficulty getting an audience. She had prepared arguments, credentials, formal requests through proper channels. Vasquez had responded to her first message within 6 minutes. "Come whenever you want," the message read. "I've been waiting for someone to ask." That was not the response Von Eel had anticipated. It was the first thing about Sura Vasquez that frightened her. The station was called Meridian 9, and it smelled like recycled air and machine oil and something else Von Eel couldn't identify, something organic, faintly sweet, that seemed to come from the direction of the cargo bays. The archivist arrived at Vasquez's consultancy office and found it smaller than expected. 1 room, 2 chairs, a desk covered in paper documents, actual paper, the kind humanity had mostly stopped using. Vasquez herself was compact, gray-haired, brown-skinned, with the scar along her left jaw that her medical records indicated she had received the option to remove and declined. She was drinking something dark from a ceramic cup when Von Eel entered, and she did not stand up, which was technically a breach of compact greeting protocol for a senior official. "You found the ledger," Vasquez said, "not a question." 47 entries, Von Eel said carefully. 31 years, all of them predating your first contact accession. 48, Vasquez said. "You missed one. Deliberately formatted to look like a maintenance log." She took a slow sip from her cup. "Sit down." Von Eel sat. "The Keth Serans," she began. "Are fine," Vasquez said. "Better than fine, actually. You probably saw the population data. I saw that the decline reversed after your visit." I did not see an explanation for how. Vasquez looked at her for a long moment. The look was not unfriendly exactly. It was the look of someone deciding how much truth a particular listener was ready for. "We taught them to hide seeds," she finally said. Von Eel waited. The Merva-On were monitoring caloric input and agricultural output, but they weren't monitoring biodiversity at the soil level. Standard Merva-An resource management. They're very good at measuring what they can see. We spent 6 days teaching the Ketserans how to cultivate a specific root crop that registers as nutritionally inert in standard Merva-An scans. It's not inert. It's actually one of the most calorie-dense plants in that sector. Vasquez set down her cup. The Ketserans already knew how to survive. They just needed one specific piece of information they didn't have. So we gave it to them. And the ledger entry? When you give someone something that saves their lives, Vasquez said, you write it down. You don't ask for repayment. You don't set terms. You just write it down, because someday You might need to remind yourself that the relationship exists, or they might need to remind you. She paused. Or someone else might need to understand what kind of network they're dealing with. A chill moved through Vaniel that she would not have been able to fully articulate. Network, she said. 48 entries, Vasquez said again. Each one a different planet, each one a different favor. Some of them very small. Some of them not small at all. She looked at the paper documents on her desk and then back at the archivist. You want to know why the Mervan voted against our compacted mission so hard? Among other things, Vasquez smiled. It was a small smile, but it had depth to it, because 11 years after Ketsora, when we showed up to the accession hearing, the Ketsoran cultural liaison was in the observation gallery. Their pre-contact, officially invisible, no standing to address the council. But they were there, and the Merva-On representative knew exactly who they were and exactly why they were there, and he understood something in that moment that most of the council didn't. Von Il found herself leaning forward. What did he understand? That the favor had already been paid, Vasquez said. The Ketsorans didn't owe us anything. We hadn't asked for anything, but they were there anyway, voluntarily, watching. Because they wanted to be there when humanity walked through a door after what we'd done for them. She picked up her cup again. The Merva-On understood that you don't buy that kind of loyalty. You can't negotiate for it after the fact. It only exists if the original favor was given without expectation of return. And he was afraid of it, Vaniel said slowly. He was afraid of what it implied, Vasquez said. About how many rooms humans had already walked through, how many doors, how many species were watching from observation galleries we didn't even know existed. The archivist sat with that for a moment. The question forming in her mind was large, and she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. She asked it anyway. How many species? Vasquez looked at her with those dark, measured eyes. Read the other 47 entries, she said. Then we'll talk. Vaniel read them over the following 2 days in Vasquez's office on paper because the documents existed only on paper. Another choice that she was beginning to understand was deliberate. Entry 7. The Savari colony ship stranded on an unpowered drift trajectory. 43 crew members, 6 months before they would have crossed into a debris field that would have killed them. A human freighter had intercepted them, transferred enough fuel cells to correct their course, and refused payment. The ledger note, they have a long memory. They will know us when we meet again. Entry 12. A Pelleran research station on the edge of a stellar event. The lead researcher had been transmitting distress calls for 9 days that no one in the compact had responded to because the station was in a politically ambiguous zone that 4 different compact members were officially pretending not to notice. A human survey vessel had responded on day 10, evacuated all personnel. The station was lost, but the researchers were alive. The ledger note, they study the deep universe. They are very good at remembering what they observe. Entry 19. This one was harder to read. A juvenile Voth, a species Vaniel recognized as one of the Compact's most powerful founding members, had been separated from a colonial group during a migration disruption. Alone, with no survival resources on a planet that was technically in human exploration territory. The human survey team that found the juvenile had spent 11 days, keeping it alive and attempting to communicate with its family group before finally making contact and effecting a reunion. The ledger note, they will remember the 11 days. So will we. Entry 23, a failed compact mediation between 2 minor species had left one of them, the Greth, facing an energy embargo that their colony survival systems could not sustain through the following winter. The compact had tabled the issue pending a procedural review that would take 8 months. A human cargo vessel had, without announcement or diplomatic clearance, simply begun delivering power cells to the great settlements. When challenged by a compact patrol, the human captain had said, very politely, that they were delivering cargo to a species in need, and that if the compact wanted to stop them, it was welcome to file the relevant paperwork. The compact had not stopped them. It wasn't clear anyone had actually wanted to. Entry 31. This was the one that Von Eel had to set down and walk away from for 20 minutes. A Merva-on patrol vessel had intercepted a human trade ship in contested space and detained it for 17 hours without cause, during which the crew had been subjected to search and seizure procedures that were technically legal under Merva-on internal law, but violated 3 separate compact transit agreements. The human crew had filed no formal complaint. When they were released, the captain had simply noted the time, noted the names of the Merva-on officers involved, and sent a copy of those notes to the ledger. The entry notation was different from the others. It didn't record a favor given, it recorded a debt owed. They took 17 hours from us. We have written it down. We remember everything we are owed as clearly as we remember everything we give. Von Eel looked up from that entry and found Vasquez watching her from across the desk. That one's different, the archivist said. Yes. The others are favors given. This one is wrong done to you. Yes, you record both. Vasquez said nothing for a moment. Then you can't understand what a favor means if you don't also understand what a transgression means. They're the same system, 2 sides. She paused. We remember everything, Archivist. The kindness and the cruelty, with equal precision, for equal duration. Von Eel thought about the Merva-on delegation at the accession hearing, voting against humanity with that strange, disproportionate intensity, and for the first time she thought she understood something she had initially misread entirely. She had assumed Merva-an feared humanity's potential alliances. She was realizing now that what they actually feared was the ledger itself, the fact that it existed, the fact that it was comprehensive, the fact that humanity had been quietly, systematically, meticulously recording every interaction with every species in the galaxy, favors given, favors received, debts owed, long before anyone had given humanity permission to exist in the wider galaxy at all. They had not been building a diplomatic network. They had been building something older and more fundamental than diplomacy. Something that every spacefaring civilization had possessed in their pre-technological past and had eventually abandoned as they became more complex, more transactional, more efficient. They had been building the thing that came before institutions, before treaties, before contracts. They had been keeping track of who helped them when they were small and who didn't. The Savari were the first piece of it that moved. Von Eel learned this not from Vasquez, but from a compact security report she had clearance for, but had never previously had reason to read. It had been filed 6 years after humanity's accession, during what was then called the Periphery Alignment Crisis, a diplomatic fracture along the Compact's outer boundary that had threatened to pull 14 minor member species into a competing power block organized by the Drevathi Conclave. The crisis had hinged on a single vote in the extended council session. The Compact needed 12 supporting votes from secondary members to maintain jurisdictional authority over the disputed zone. They had 11. The 12th was uncertain. A species called the Avith, who had historically been neutral to the point of institutional paralysis, and who showed every sign of abstaining again. The humans had not lobbied the Avith. They hadn't sent diplomatic representatives. They hadn't offered trade agreements or security guarantees or any of the tools that species with political leverage normally deployed. What they had done was send a single message. 3 sentences. Von Eel had found it in the security report, flagged as an anomaly because its contents did not match any standard diplomatic communication format. 20 years ago, your colony ship on the Veth Drift was in trouble. We were there, we remember. The Avith had voted with the Compact. When the Compact's senior diplomatic attaché had later asked the 8th delegation why they had changed their position, the delegation's response had been logged in the security report with what Von Eel could only describe as bureaucratic bewilderment. The 8th representative had said, "We did not change our position. We honored a relationship." The attaché had asked what relationship. The 8th had looked at them with what witnesses described as something between surprise and quiet sorrow and said, "You do not know about the humans and the Savari? Then you do not understand what you have in your compact. You should learn, while there is still time to understand it correctly." That was the moment Von Eel stopped reading the documents as historical curiosities. She stopped cataloging them. She stopped trying to understand the scope of the network from the outside. She went back to Vasquez's office. She sat down in the same chair. She looked at the woman across the desk and said, very directly, "How many species have you done this with?" Vasquez looked at her for a long moment. "Sit with the question differently," she said. "Don't ask how many. Ask yourself, in the 43 years you've been the Compact's archivist, how many crises have resolved in ways that didn't quite fit the political calculus? How many votes that should have gone one way went another? How many species that had no reason to support humanity's interests surprised everyone by doing exactly that?" Von Eel felt something cold move through her, because she knew the answer. She had noted those anomalies for decades and filed them as statistical variants, as the unpredictable irrationality that all complex systems occasionally produced. "You were there," she said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. "In all of them, quietly." "Not me personally," Vasquez said. 17 people on Kethsora, a different crew for every entry. Regular people, freighter captains, survey teams, medical personnel, trade negotiators who happened to be in the right place and chose to do something. Nobody coordinated it. That's the thing you need to understand. There was no central plan. There was just a culture. She picked up her cup, found it empty, set it down again. "We teach our children, if you can help, help. Write it down. Don't ask for anything back. Write it down anyway." "And the debts," Von Eel said. "The wrongs recorded." Vasquez nodded slowly. "Those two. Every child learns both. Entry 31, Von Eel said. "The Mervon detained your crew for 17 hours. Yes, that was 19 years ago. For 17 hours. Yes, that was 19 years ago. 22, Vasquez said. "We count carefully." The word carefully landed in the room with a weight that didn't dissipate. "There are no Mervon in the ledger," Von Eel said. "I read all 48 entries. The Mervon appear only as adversaries, as the party that did harm, never as a species to whom you gave a favor." Vasquez was very still. "That's right. In 48 entries, across 31 years, humanity never had a positive interaction with the Mervon worth recording." "We had 2 interactions with them," Vasquez said. "You found one. The detention. A beat. Look for the other one. Entry 44. You'll need to read it very carefully." Von Eel picked up entry 44. It was formatted differently from the others, shorter, denser, and the handwriting was not the same as the other entries. Someone different had written this one, someone whose hand had not been entirely steady. It was not a favor given or a debt owed. It was a record of what happened when a human crew arrived at a Mervaran processing facility that was, officially, a mining installation and found something that the official designation did not include. The record was brief, forensically so. Facts without emotional language, stripped to the bone in the way that Von Eel had seen in official documentation of terrible events, where the writer has made a conscious choice to let the facts carry the weight rather than bear it themselves. She read it once. She read it again. She set it down. "This was never filed with the compact," she said. "No. This is evidence of this would have triggered mandatory." She stopped, controlled herself. This should have been reported. We reported it, Vasquez said quietly, internally, to ourselves, to the ledger. That's not what I mean. This should have gone to the council, to the justice mechanism. There were procedures, Vasquez said. We know, we read them, we sat with them. She met Von Eel's eyes. And we made a different choice. We decided that what we had found was ours to carry, not to hand off, not to process through an institution that it's been 11 years calling that planet Processing Zone 7 without asking what was being processed. The silence between them was the longest of the conversation. You've been carrying this for? Von Eel checked the date on the entry. Her voice fell. For 16 years, some of us longer, Vasquez said. The crew that went in, the ones who wrote that entry. She looked at her hands. They wrote it down because that's what we do. We write down what we see. We don't forget it. We don't process it and move on. We hold it. She paused. All of it? Forever? That's Von Eel's search for the word. That sounds unbearable. Yes, Vasquez said simply. It is. And we do it anyway. The Drevathi conclave made their move 14 months after Von Eel's visit to Meridian 9. It was not a military action. The Drevathi were too sophisticated for direct aggression. They preferred institutional pressure, economic leverage, the careful engineering of dependency relationships that gave them control without requiring a single weapon to be raised. They had been the preeminent political architects of the Outer Compact for 60 years, and they were very, very good at it. What they did was file a jurisdictional dissolution petition, a legal mechanism that would, if passed by a 2/3 council majority, effectively strip 15 minor species of their compact membership and force them to renegotiate terms individually under Drevathi economic pressure. It was elegant. It was technically legal. It was the culmination of a 20-year strategic positioning campaign. They needed 19 votes to pass it. They had calculated with considerable precision that they had 17 committed and 2 likely. The humans, they assessed, had minimal leverage in the council and would not be able to influence the outcome. The vote was scheduled for the 4th day of the Compact's quarterly session. On the 2nd day, a Greth Energy Commissioner named Vasquez gave an unscheduled address to the open session. This was unusual because the Greth almost never spoke in open session. They were a quiet species, bureaucratically cautious, conflict-averse to a degree that sometimes frustrated their allies. Vasquez spoke for 11 minutes. He did not speak about the petition. He spoke about a winter, 8 years ago, when his colony's power systems were failing, and an institution that was supposed to help them had tabled the issue for procedural review. He spoke about a human cargo captain named Delara Osei who had arrived without clearance, without fanfare, without asking for anything, and delivered enough power cells to keep his people alive until the procedural review concluded 6 months later. He said, "We are being asked to vote on the nature of our membership in this compact. I want to say, before that vote occurs, that there is a species in this chamber that already showed us what membership means. Not in a treaty, in a cargo hold, in winter." He sat down. On the 3rd day, the Savari ambassador spoke for 3 minutes. He said only that his species had a long memory, that they remembered the Veth Drift, that they intended to honor what they remembered. On the 3rd evening, the Pellerin delegation's chief researcher, now retired but present as an observer, submitted a written testimony to the record that Von Eel would later read in its entirety, though she could only bear to do so once. It was 9 pages long. It was not about the petition. It was about 9 days of distress calls in a politically ambiguous zone, and one signal that finally answered. The Voth senior delegate did not speak. The Voth almost never spoke in open session. But she attended the vote personally, which she had not done in 6 years, and her presence was noted by everyone in the chamber who understood what it meant. On the 4th day, the Drevathi dissolution petition received 11 votes. They had calculated for 17. The 6 votes that did not materialize had, in most cases, no official explanation in the record. Delegates who had been expected to support the petition simply voted otherwise. When pressed, they gave answers that the compact's political analysts found difficult to categorize, answers that referenced conversations they'd had, obligations they felt, relationships that predated the current political question. The Drevithy delegation demanded an investigation into procedural irregularities. The investigation found none. What it found, instead, because Von Eel had ensured the right documents were in the right hands, carefully without announcement, was the ledger. Not all of it. Not entry 44. But enough. 43 entries, covering 31 years, 43 species, 43 interactions that the compact's political modeling had never included in its calculations because they predated humanity's official presence and had no formal institutional record. The senior Drevithy analyst, reviewing the ledger, reportedly sat in silence for a long time. Then she called her superior and said something that was not in the official record but was passed from witness to witness until it reached Von Eel's ears 6 months later. She had said, "We built our strategy on the assumption that relationships require institutions, that loyalty requires contracts, that obligations expire." A pause. "We were wrong. They have been building something we don't have a name for. They have been building it since before we were watching." Her superior had asked, "What do we do?" The analyst had said, "I don't know. We don't have a counter-strategy for a species that simply refuses to forget." Vasquez called Von Eel 2 days after the vote. Not a message, a direct call, which the archivist almost didn't accept because she was reviewing secondary fallout from the council session and her queue was catastrophically full. She accepted it. She wasn't sure why. Vasquez looked the same as she had at Meridian 9. Same gray hair, same measured eyes, same ceramic cup. Behind her, through what might have been a viewport, stars moved slowly. "I heard the count," she said. 11 votes, Von Eel said. "They expected 17. "I know what they expected. The ledger," Von Eel said. "I made sure it reached the right people. I want you to know that I made that decision independently, without authorization, and that I will accept whatever consequence." "I know," Vasquez said. "You're in the ledger now." Von Eel stopped. "That's not... I didn't do it for... I know that too," Vasquez said. "That's why you're in it." Von Eel sat with that for a moment. The feeling it produced was difficult to name, something between honor and weight. "Entry 44, she finally said. "The Merva-Ann facility." Vasquez was quiet. "It's still in the ledger. Unresolved. You've been carrying it for 16 years. 22 years for some of the crew," Vasquez said. "Is there a point at which..." Von Eel stopped. Reframed the question. "What does resolution look like for something like that?" Vasquez looked out her viewport for a long moment. The stars moved. "We don't know yet," she said finally. "We're still deciding. We've been deciding for 22 years. A pause. "Humans are very patient when the thing we're deciding matters. The Merva-Ann delegation knows," Von Eel said, after the ledger was distributed. "Some of them have seen it. They know you have entry 44, yes. And they know you haven't used it. Yes, that must terrify them." The corner of Vasquez's mouth moved, not quite a smile, something older. "We're not holding it over them," she said. "That's not what the ledger is for. It's not leverage, it's memory. We hold it because we were there, because those were real people and real events, and they deserve to be remembered by someone." She set down her cup. "The Mervan are afraid because they understand the ledger correctly. It's not a weapon, it's a record, and they know that as long as we're alive and we're human, we will keep the record, for as long as it takes. For whatever it means, without being asked to and without being able to stop." Von Eel thought about that for a long time after the call ended. She thought about 48 entries, about 31 years of quiet interactions in the margins of the galaxy's political history. About a Greth winter and 11 distress calls and 17 hours of detention and 11 days keeping a juvenile Voth alive on a cold planet, and a crew arriving at a Morvaon facility and finding something that should have broken them and instead simply entered the ledger in careful handwriting by a hand that was not entirely steady. She thought about the Dravathi analyst. We don't have a counter-strategy for a species that simply refuses to forget. She thought about what the Avith representative had said years ago, in a voice that combined surprise and quiet sorrow. You do not understand what you have in your compact. She thought she was beginning to understand it now. Not as a political structure, not as a network of strategic alliances, but as what it actually was, the result of a culture that had taught its children, generation after generation, to pay attention to who was struggling and to help if they could, and then to write it down, and to never let the record die. Because someday, maybe in 6 years, maybe in 22, maybe longer, the record would be the only proof that a moment of decency had occurred, and some things deserved to be proven. She opened a new document on her terminal. She wrote, "This favor is recorded. It will not be forgotten." She had not planned to write that. But once it was written, it was right, and she did not delete it. She was 43 years into her career. She had spent those years cataloging the galaxy's history, its crises, its turning points. She had thought she understood what moved civilizations: power, resources, strategic positioning, institutional momentum. She was revising that understanding now. What moved civilizations, it turned out, was simpler and more durable than any of those things. What moved civilizations was the memory of a cargo ship arriving in winter, a corrected drift trajectory, 6 days in a valley teaching people to hide seeds, a distress call answered on day 10, 11 days on a cold planet. The galaxy had 400 recognized spacefaring species, 14 major compact powers, 60 years of complex multilateral diplomacy and institutional architecture. And somewhere in all of that, a small species from a single water-heavy planet had been quietly moving through it with a ledger and the culture that made the recording of kindness feel as natural as breathing, and the forgetting of it as impossible as stopping the heart. The Mervan had been afraid of what humanity might build. They had not understood that humanity had already built it. Before anyone was watching, in the marginal spaces, the unmonitored valleys, the politically ambiguous zones, the cold planets where a juvenile Voth was scared and alone and a human crew stayed for 11 days because leaving felt wrong. Not because leaving would damage their strategic positioning, because it would have been wrong. That distinction, so small, so irrational, so completely inexplicable by every model of civilizational behavior the Compact had ever developed, was the thing the Dravathi analyst had no counter-strategy for. Because you cannot build a counter-strategy against a species whose fundamental unit of political action is not interest, not leverage, not calculated reciprocity, but the simple, stubborn, unkillable insistence on remembering that another person needed help and you were there. 48 entries in a ledger, 48 moments when a human being had been in a position to look away and had instead looked directly at what was in front of them and said, "I see this. I will not forget this. I will write it down." The galaxy had spent 30 years trying to understand what humanity was. The answer had been sitting in an open registry between a grain shipment and a navigational correction, addressed to no one, available to anyone who thought to look. It was not a strategy. It was not a superpower. It was something much older and much harder to kill. It was the oldest form of strength in the universe, the refusal to let the important things become invisible. The decision, made quietly and without audience, to keep the record, to carry what was heavy. to remember what happened on the cold planet, in the unmonitored valley, in the 17 hours of an illegal detention, and to let that memory mean something, not because meaning was convenient, but because abandoning it was the one thing, in all the vast and complicated moral territory humans navigated, that they had never been able to bring themselves to do. Somewhere on a station near the outer boundary, a 71-year-old woman with a scar she'd chosen to keep was looking at stars through a viewport and holding 22 years of something that had no name in any compact language. And she was still there, still carrying it, still writing it down, because that was what humans did with the things that mattered. They didn't let them go.